Welcome to today's Day in History. Now, today we're going to talk about the first spacewalk. It happened on March 18th, 1965. Now, our big idea, which many of you have pointed out that I've forgotten to add, I'm going to go with appearances can be deceiving. And the reason is that it took many years for the real story of the first spacewalk to come out, because some of the problems they ran into didn't look so good for the Soviet Union. But let's get started. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the space race. You ready for our first picture? Here we go. We're going to the space race. Okay. Now, the US and Russia were constantly racing each other to see who could do the most in space, who could go the farthest, who could have the best technology and the best spaceships. And so far, with Sputnik, which really surprised America, Sputnik, yeah, we talked about that. And then there was the dog Laika that went up. Remember Laika? And a day in history we didn't get to do this year, Ivan Ivanovich. You remember the one about the spacesuit filled with like rats and bugs, and it landed in a field, and the farmer runs up and like punches it because he thought it was a real person. Yeah, you should look that one up. But there was that one as well. Now, in 1961, however, the U.S. did send up Ham the Chimp. Yeah, it's one of the favorites. And Ham the Chimp was a big success. It showed that we could have, we could send up something similar to a human, have it survive and come back down. Now, the Russians did get Yuri Gagarin up into space first. Remember him? Well, after Yuri Gagarin went up, we started thinking about the other things we needed to do in space. And one of those was a spacewalk. Now, we had gone up and humans had gone in spaceships and they'd come back down, but we'd never gone outside. And the Russians found out that the U.S. was planning to do a spacewalk. Now, Alexei Leonov was approached, Alexei Leonov was approached, and he was asked if he wanted to be part of this new mission. Now, it wasn't planned 100%. Now, one of the things that happened was that they realized that they needed to beat America. They needed to get there first. They needed to be the winners. It was called the space race for a reason. Now, when the spaceship went up, it worked pretty well. It went up. They got up into space, and Alexei and his partner, his name, nobody really talks about him much, but his name was Pavel. I'm just going to call him Pavel because I can't pronounce his last name. Is it Belyaev? Something like that. Well, they both went up, and when they got up to the height that they were ready to test out their spacewalk, Alexei goes out the airlock. Now, as soon as Alexei went out, and by the way, the Russians are filming this whole thing, and they're filming it, and they're broadcasting it to all their people, and probably to the world as well. And everything is going great. Alexei goes out of the airlock. Now, this airlock was pretty interesting. It was this like fabric inflatable tube that came off the spacecraft. See, this is what it looked like. It's easier to see a picture than have me do hand signals. But so Alexei goes out, and as soon as he goes out, he has a 17-foot tether or a 17-foot rope. And as he goes back, he starts spinning, and they're filming, and everything's looking great. And then all of a sudden, the people on the ground realize that things aren't going quite as they had planned. Now, his spacesuit starts to inflate. And once the Russians on the ground realize that things might go bad, they cut the video feed, and they start playing this song. Now, if you're up in space, this is kind of a depressing song to hear. You ready? So imagine you're a Russian and you're watching TV and you're super excited, and then all of a sudden Mozart's Requiem comes on and there's no more video. You might be a little concerned. So let's turn off the music. You can listen to the song if you want. It's actually a really good song. I have it on my playlist. But after the video feed cut, Alexei found himself in a lot of trouble because his spacesuit started inflating to the point where his hands were coming out of the gloves, and he realized he wasn't going to be able to get back in the airlock because his spacesuit was so big. The Vostok 2, which is their spacecraft, was really, really small. And so he actually, without asking anybody, released a valve and let out air from his spacesuit. But when he did that, the pressure changed so quickly that he almost got what they call the bends, which is like a decompression sickness. It's something that happens if you're like super deep underwater and you come up too fast. But he made it in. He made it in before the spacecraft went over to the dark side because it was going to be night in like 15 or 20 minutes. So he gets in, barely, well, as he goes into the airlock, he went in head first instead of feet first. And so he had to find a way to like turn himself around. It was so cramped. It was pretty rough. And so he finally gets in, and they let go of the airlock. They push it off, and they're trying to close the hatch. Okay, the hatch won't close, but the spaceship thinks the hatch is closed, and so it starts trying to repressurize the ship. It starts to pump in oxygen, but it's just going out the crack in the hatch. And so what happened is there built up a lot of oxygen, and oxygen is very flammable. If there would have been a spark, it might have exploded, but it didn't. They finally got it closed, and then they realized that the automatic system that was going to send them back to the planet, back to Earth, wasn't working. So they had a computer set up that was going to like fly them home, but it didn't work. And so they had to manually do it. They had to like fly it themselves. But here's what happened. They set the location because they wanted to make sure they landed in Russia, because it would be a really bad idea to land like in Kansas or something, right? Could you imagine what would have happened if that spaceship landed in Kansas? So they finally get it going, but it takes them 46 seconds to get from the controls back to their seat. And because it's so small, the center of gravity got shifted, and they ended up landing like way off course, like over 2,000 kilometers off course. They ended up in the Ural Mountains in Siberia. Okay, so not only did the spacesuit not work right, the hatch not work right, the reentry system didn't work right, they land in the middle of Siberia during the mating season for bears and wolves in an area that is so wooded, there's so many trees that the helicopters can't even land. They actually had to have people on skis, okay? See, skis, go get them. And it took them like something like 30 hours to get to these two cosmonauts. So in the end, they did have the first spacewalk. And up until the fall of the Soviet Union, when they could tell the real story, it was a very celebrated event. It was only later that we realized that appearances, like I said, can be deceiving. We thought everything went fairly okay, but in reality, they were this close multiple times to, well, dying in space. Now, the space race went on, and we've talked quite a bit about some of the other items, but today's day in history is the day that we had our very first spacewalk.